What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining the Glass Horror Channel, the best horror channel here on YouTube. And today we have another history of horror covering the 1960s, specifically Alfred Hitchcock and Psycho. Let's go. All right, so the 1960s, by comparison, surprisingly, was a little slower in volume of movies than the 1950s or even the 40s and so on and so forth. However, there are a lot of great titles that back then we didn't know how far they would go. Today, they are still talked about today, and they've been remade and and studied countless times over. And the person spearheading the 1960s wasn't even traditionally a horror director. Alfred Hitchcock was known as the master of suspense. Most of his movies were in the crime, like thriller, suspense subgenres, more so than pure horror. However, he had some good movies that came out this year, and by far, Alfred Hitchcock's biggest movie, arguably the father of the slasher subgenre, Psycho, 1960. So the awesome thing about Psycho was it really set the groundwork and the blueprint for movies to come, like the Jason Voorheeses and the Michael Myers, and even this of the same year, Peeping Tom, Black Christmas. I mean, the list goes on and on. If you think of a slasher film, Psycho was pretty much where it got started. Now there were other slashers before it, but they were cut from different cloths and they were more on the monster side, or the scientifically warped side than being a individual, a human being that was on a murderous rampage. So the movie Psycho follows a guy named Norman Bates. Norman Bates has split personality, and we don't know this until the end of the movie. The awesome thing about how great Alfred Hitchcock was the direction of this was really good. So the movie really focuses Marion Crane, who, if you just sit down and didn't know anything about this movie at all, no trailers, no reviews, no talk to anybody about it, you wouldn't know it would end up like it did, because it followed Marion Crane, who was given some money by her boss to take to the bank. And instead of taking it to the bank, she just flees with it. So there's a back and forth with her present situation and then going back to where she left from in the trail of the money, and how the boss reacted and things like that. So the main focus just seems like this woman on the run. You really have no idea what she's going to get herself into, but she just happens to run to the Bates Motel and meeting Norman Bates. And there are so many iconic horror tropes and scenes that come from this movie. The shower scene in which Marion is killed. I mean, it's one of the most. It's I don't know where to put it as far as levels of iconic, but it's up there. It's definitely up there. The silhouette of what we thought was Norman's mother, raising the knife, and back then we didn't have a lot to go off on as far as theatricality and a lot of different crazy types of graphics. So the suspense, the music, and then the lack thereof music. The music, the times where there was no music at all, was what elevated the scenes. I mean, the iconic sound of the knife going down, the music that was playing. I mean, that's ingrained in everyone's memory that has seen that movie. And then you have Norman Bates, who is playing this two-sided character where he's extremely attached to his mother. He talks to his mother, and until the end of the movie, you don't even know that his mother is somebody completely separate. Or you think his mother is completely separate from him. It's not to the end that you find out they're one and the same. And back then, for 1960, this was huge. And it was such a shocking reveal when they walked down in the basement and turned in the mother's chair to find out what had become of mother. Now, Norman Bates was not pulled out of thin air. Norman Bates was actually based on a real individual named Ed Gein, who was a murderer back in the 40s and 50s. Now, Ed Gein most of what they covered with Norman Bates was what Ed Gein had. Ed Gein's mother died when, and that was his sole support. He had poured everything into her. When she died, he did dig up her grave. He was extremely close to his mother. He did dress up in women's clothing to seemingly become his mother. He did also feel as if that she talked to him via when he was going to kill somebody. So all of the things that Norman Bates entailed came from Ed Gein. So you going back to Psycho, the amount of influence that it's had. I mean, think about a movie like Silence of the Lambs with Anthony Hopkins, focusing on a single character being this killer. And the character Buffalo Bill was also another portion of Ed Gein. So Ed Gein inspired both Psycho and Silence of the Lambs. There's a connection there. You think of something like Misery with Kathy Bates' character, who very unassuming, in the same ilk as a Norman Bates, but turned out to be this monster. There's just so much horror that we've seen over the years that if you go back to where it came from a conceptual standpoint, a lot of roads lead back to Psycho. Psycho is, for me, I didn't see Psycho until I believe I'd seen Halloween first. I'd seen a few other movies first, and then I got to this point where I was in like my late teens, where I was fully. That's when I knew I was like a full on horror fan, and I went trying to find everything that I could. I was going back to the 50s, the 60s, even and further back from that, and I came across Psycho, and I watched it. I don't know, but I might have been in my early 20s when I watched it, and I was terrified. I was gripped by what I saw on screen, even though by that point I already heard what had happened. I already knew how it was going to play out. I just hadn't seen it for myself. So to sit there and watch it, dark room, and just engrossed in the movie, it is a beautiful, a wonderfully, beautifully made movie, and it builds up on so many different levels. I mean, like again, you've got the acting. You've got the fact that it didn't just lead only about Norman Bates. They had a whole movie that could have been separate from it completely. And then it just ends up with this. So you go from crime, woman on the run, to now horror. And all of it was intriguing. If you have never seen this movie, it is, I mean, it's the father of, or the grandfather of the slasher subgenre. And there's just so much to take away that if you go watch, you'll see it today. You'll see it in Halloween. You'll see it in Friday the 13th. You'll see it in pretty much any slasher, The Strangers, any slashers that you've ever watched would not be where they were if it wasn't for the success and the success of Psycho, which is on the heels of the direction of Alfred Hitchcock. So this one was mainly on Psycho. I will get into furthering Alfred Hitchcock and furthering the 1960s in my next video. This is the Glad's Horror Channel, the best horror channel here on YouTube. See you guys next time.